Jesus has arranged a final supper with his followers. We know the 12 were present, including Judas Iscariot. The Gospels do not say that the women were there, but they don't say the women weren't there either. Absence of evidence is not the same thing as evidence of absence. So I'd like to think that along with Peter and Andrew, James and John, there were also Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Susanna and others. At this supper, Jesus does something extraordinary. He takes the bread, it might have been matzah if this Last Supper were a Passover meal. He breaks it, he distributes it to his followers, and he says, "Take, eat. This is my body." And after dinner, he takes the cup of wine and he distributes that to his followers as well and says, "Take, you all, drink. This is my blood that has been poured out for you. This is, as the Gospel of Luke puts it, a new covenant." The language is shocking. Indeed, it's offensive. The very idea that Jews would eat someone's body, drink someone's blood, that would have sounded like cannibalism. It would have sounded like an abomination. But Jesus uses this striking language to impress upon his followers the gift that he is giving to them. The language is sacrificial. And in Jewish antiquity, indeed in pagan antiquity, everybody understood sacrifice. You gave to God that which was most precious that you had, and then you would eat part of that sacrifice as if you were having a meal together with God. The language then was shocking. When Christians today participate in communion, participate in Eucharist, they should think about the shock here. Because what does it point to? It points to Jesus giving up his life for the sake of his followers, for the sake of the world that God so loved. And if we don't hear the shock today, we're missing something extremely important and extremely profound, because we're missing the shock of someone willing to give up his life for the sake of others. Today, we do not live in a sacrificial culture. Today, when we eat meat, we usually get the meat from the grocery store and we don't think twice about it. In antiquity, most people did not eat meat except, particularly for Jews, when they went to the temple, because meat is expensive. So when you went to the temple, it was an opportunity to offer sacrifice and then actually to eat meat. For Passover, the lambs that were eaten were sacrificed in the temple, and then you and your family would come together, neighbors, friends, relations, and you would eat this common food. It would be as if you were eating in the presence of God. It would be as if you were eating with God. It was the German philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach who said, "You are what you eat." So when you eat the meal of the sacrifice, that proclaims your family, your lineage, your kinship, your religion. This also means that for Jesus followers, when they eat the elements, the bread, when they drink the wine, they have become part of a new family, a new tribe, a new community, the family of Jesus. And they celebrate his death, whether understood as a sacrifice or a ransom or a gift. But the important thing is that they come together as a new family, a new community. This is not just eating and drinking. Eating and drinking in antiquity define who you are and proclaim your beliefs. In the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus' Last Supper is a Passover meal. The technical term for that is Seder, which literally means order. The Passover meal is a choreographed meal. Everything in its place. You eat certain foods, you tell certain stories, you recline as if you're finally free from your slavery, and you recollect where your ancestors were and how you fit into that broader story. What Matthew, Mark, and Luke allow us to do is to take the Passover story, which talks about freedom from slavery in Egypt, and make this an additional story, not erasing the past, but adding to it. The new covenant that Jesus institutes does not do away with the old, it adds to it. So for Jesus, we have a new type of Passover, a new type of freedom. Here, freedom from slavery to sin, from slavery to despair, from slavery to addiction. This also means that when Christians celebrate this new covenant, this new Passover, they have to remember that they too have been set free, and then think, from what have we been set free, and how do we celebrate that freedom? The participation in communion, the participation in Eucharist, is a participation in a Passover, a feast of freedom. We have to think, from what has God set us free? The earliest stories in the New Testament do not come from the Gospels. They actually come from the writings of Paul. In writing to this recalcitrant congregation in Corinth, where people are divided by rich and poor, slave and free, factions, Paul reminds them that they all participate in the Lord's Supper. And he tells us in chapter 11 that people have been abusing this system, that some folks are coming in early and eating everything, and folks, particularly the poor people who come in late, might not be getting what they deserve. And Paul says, take this seriously. If you abuse the Lord's Supper, that's why some of you are ill, and indeed, some of you have died. Jesus gives his life for the community, and then people are fussing over who's eating what? Really? Paul says, Jesus gave his life for you. Surely the least you can do is come to the table as equals, as brothers and sisters in Christ, and have a meal that shows your unity rather than displays your factionalism. For people in churches today, when they participate in Eucharist, when they participate in communion, they should be doing so reconciled to the other people in the church, rather than profaning the Lord's Supper by maintaining factionalism, by bearing grudges, by holding on to resentment. Communion is precisely that time to set yourself free of anything that would keep you from showing love, from feeling love to other members of that congregation. Judas Iscariot is an extraordinarily problematic figure in the New Testament. According to the early stories of the Gospels, he's just as good a disciple as anyone else. He goes on mission, he proclaims the good news, he exorcises demons. But we're also told, particularly in the Gospels of Luke and John, that Satan entered into Judas Iscariot. Jesus knew, according to the Gospels, that Judas would be the one to betray him. And Judas does. His story gets worse and worse as we go from Matthew to Luke to John. By the time we get to John, Judas is a thief. He steals from the community. The devil is within him, and it would have been better had he never been born. According to the Gospel of Matthew, Judas, when he realizes that Jesus has been condemned to death, hangs himself. According to the book of Acts, Judas falls headlong and in effect implodes. The Gospels look like they don't know quite what to do with Judas, and neither do I, and neither should we. Jesus participates in the Last Supper, where Jesus talks about forgiveness of sin. Can we also forgive Judas? Can we speculate about what he was thinking? What desperation drove him to betray Jesus? Was it because he needed to force Jesus' hand to do something about the Romans? Was it because of greed? That's what Matthew suggests. Was it because he was possessed by Satan? That's what Luke and John suggest. We don't know what Judas was thinking. We do know that the story of Judas continues. The name Judas, which is also the same name as Judah, like Judah Maccabee, or Jude, as in the Epistle of Jude, or the Beatles song, Hey Jude, literally means Jewish man, man of Judah. So that through the centuries, Judas came to represent the Jewish people, And that was not good for the history of Jewish-Christian relations. I wonder today if we might recover Judas as yet an apostle and a good one who felt driven to do something that today looks like betrayal. Could we imagine what he was thinking? Can we imagine how Judas felt, how he felt compelled to kill himself, as the Gospel of Matthew says, and then perhaps take pity on Judas and recognize that according to the Gospels, there's always room for reconciliation, always room for forgiveness, and then remind ourselves that people who are in such despair because they have done something so horrible, they don't think they can still live with it, to remind them that they too are part of the community and they too have something for which to live.